Well, I think we are in live already. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this panel. This is a panel about Southern Europe municipalist networks. We are reaching the end of this amazing event, the Fearless City. We've had 1 week of events and panels. We are almost at the end. Actually, we have only one panel left with the Mayor of Barcelona, the Mayor of Santiago de Chile. It has been 1 week of incredible discussions, I have to say, for those who had the opportunity to follow them, and it got a lot of interest. We've had more than 1,000 people following in live. We have more than 5,000 viewers in YouTube. Well, that shows that the municipalism and the Fearless City movement, it's more alive than ever. And I'm very happy to be here today with you in this afternoon together. And I will introduce the speakers now. Emily Clancy from Bologna. She's a member of the Coalizione Civica. We also have with us Beatriz Gomes. She's a member of the Portuguese National Parliament, and she will be the candidate in the city of Lisbon for Bloco de Esquerda. And finally, David Adler, the coordinator of Progressive International, and I believe former foreign policy advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, that we all know very well. Thank you, all of you, for being here. I wanted to share a couple of pieces of practical information. This event will take place in English. We don't have interpretation for this event. You can use, those following us in the audience, you can use the Q&A tool in Zoom, and later on we'll have a Q&A around with the speakers. So feel free to share your questions in the panel. Well, I will introduce myself as well. My name is Jesus Hernandez. I work as an advisor on taxation and economic policy to the MEP Ernesto Urtasun in the European Parliament. I will be your moderator today. And well, I think this session is very, very important, and it's crucial that we have in the discussion today, because in Southern Europe, we have a lot in common, right? We suffered the austerity. In Italy and Spain, we suffered the first wave of the COVID more than anyone else in Europe. We are peripheral in the EU. We have shared problems because of that. We are the southern border. We are already suffering the climate change, and well, tourism also plays an important role for our economies with all these consequences. With all these common chances, we believe it's important to build alliances and to better address all these problems all together. So this is exactly what we're going to discuss today, how to make it possible. So let's get started. Emily, we'll start with you. I wanted to ask you. I mean, you are from Coalizione Civica per Bologna, and beyond the position of your movement, your party, in many local projects from Bologna that you know better than anyone else, you also advocate for a fair answer to the pandemic, fair answer to the economic and social crisis, fair answer to the environmental crisis that we are living. I wanted to ask you, with all these challenges, all these crises that are global, that they have a global nature, what alliances do we need to achieve this goal? What role the cities should play? What are the common networks that we need to face these challenges? Emily, the floor is yours.
Sure. So thanks so much again for the invitation for hosting Fearless Cities. It's always such a great opportunity for us to better our knowledge in municipalism, and also just to feel less alone, which is an important goal, as you know, in cities. I feel in Italy for sure, but I'm quite sure also in most of the southern cities, you sort of feel like you're dealing with problems on your own, because because you have such little power compared to maybe the regional government or the national government. And instead, when we're in Fearless Cities and we connect with our transnational networks, we sort of take a breath and remember that we're not alone and we're sharing many issues and we're facing them together. So I just wanted to anticipate that to the conversation because it really helps us. Thank you again. So to answer your question, I'd split the answer in two, alliances that we need and alliances that I'm not sure we need, but at the moment we are pursuing. I'll be more clear in that we're just finishing now our first term as Coalizione Civica. We ran 5 years ago and elected some city councilors and neighborhood councilors on the opposition of what is here the Social Democratic Party, basically. In Bologna, obviously, it has a very big history and it has almost always won the elections. So we ran on our own and we sort of strengthened our organization in these years. But now we're making a difficult choice to run in the next elections in coalition with the Democratic Party, which has just been our adversary for 5 years. And so this is one of the two answers. So an alliance that we are pursuing, not necessarily that we need as an ideal alliance, but that we felt we needed as for the situation we're living. You were very clear in your question, and I agree with this. We are coming out of a pandemic, and the economic and social and environmental crisis are very real. And in these past 5 years, with only a couple of seats in city council and from the opposition, we have always advanced an agenda that was, of course, more progressive, that was more mindful of climate change and of the social crisis we're living in. But of course, with so little seats, we weren't able to bring as much of our agenda into effect as we had wanted to. So this time we're saying, okay, we're strong now, we have an identity, we're a municipal platform, but what we need to do is our second alliance, the one that we really need, bring movements that have been working on tackling climate change and working in solidarity and social issues in our city and bring them into power. Usually politicians go to these people and ask them for their vote. And our mantra is saying, no, this time we don't want your vote. We want you to run and we want you to get a part of government, get a part of the power in this city and redistribute it to its citizens and to future generations. Our earth is literally burning. I'm half Canadian. And so what's happening right now in a country that's famously cold, of course, keeps us all alert on this. But even in our own cities, there are many situations where we know that it's time for a very decided change now or never. We only have a decade perhaps to avoid reaching the point of non-return on climate change. Again, we saw this very well in all the southern countries after the 2008, which in Italy and I think Spain too arrived more around 2011 crises. The answer was always cuts, especially in welfare, especially in healthcare issues and policies. This is why we feel that we need to be in a place of power now to avoid this. We, the left, who are mindful of these issues and who really think that taking care of everyone and not leaving anybody behind is the only way to go forward together as a society, need to grab those seats in the city administration. One last thing, we are trying to insert an analysis of political policies in our city that is mindful of the impact that any political policy will have, A, on our environment, and B, on gender. So we're thinking of tools that can measure the impact of policies on these mega issues, let's say, And in our next term, those will be mandatory for, before we think devise any political policy, we're going to measure what kind of impact it has on gender divide and on the environment. So that should hopefully help wake everybody up on these issues. And one last point is, of course, as well as we want to bring movements into power in the institution, we also want to connect the institution with the movement that remains outside of the institution, and that's going to be positive and going to keep us on our toes and in action. So we're thinking of ways to implement any sort of participatory politics. Right now, we're working on assemblies on climate change, where citizens are going to participate and they're going to be randomly selected to be part of these commissions, and they're going to be given the tools to study climate issues in our city and then give a response that the council after will have to vote. So we're thinking of these sort of participatory politics. And the last thing, of course, is very important, a transnational alliance of cities like we are, to tackle together what we are facing alone. One thing for sure that Barcelona has taught us a lot about is Airbnb, especially after the crises. There's going to be a surge in the need for housing and people losing their homes, unfortunately. So we need to think of a way together as cities to promote new legislation to contain the fact that these mega Airbnb associations can have all the houses and basically there's no right to for the city for our citizens. As a city alone, we haven't been able to have a great impact on this, but I think together we could probably move to ask for European legislation or national legislation if we ally with other cities in our own countries.
Well, thank you, Emily. That was very clear, and you made perfect use of your time, 7 minutes, as we planned at the beginning. So now I will give the floor to Beatriz Gómez Diaz. The Bloco de Izquierda, your party, it has been in charge of the education and social rights in the Lisbon Council. And these portfolios, they have been very, very tough, especially as a result of the social crisis that goes hand by hand with the COVID, right? With the impact in certain economic sectors, and in charge of social rights, I guess that it has been very challenging for the Bloco in Lisbon to deal with that crisis. I wanted to ask you, for me, one iconic picture of something that proves that the austerity era is over in Europe. For me, one very iconic picture is when the president of the Commission, von der Leyen, approving the Portuguese plan and making these jokes with the Prime Minister of Portugal, talking about going to the bank. And it was the first country getting the plan approved, together with Greece, together with Italy and Spain. It was the first round. So for me, it's very iconic, the countries that probably suffered the austerity the most in the previous crisis. So yeah, my question to you is, I wanted to ask you, what's your feeling on the way the COVID crisis has been managed this time? Is it different than the hardcore austerity times of 2010? And also how the networks, the cities, how we should interact with this new reality of the post-austerity era. So Emily, Beatriz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesus. Hi, Emily. Hi, David. And thank you for the invitation, for the possibility for participating in this conversation. It's very important to share our points of view and learn with the experience of the others. So, answer to your question, we have the knowledge that this crisis has a very huge impact in inequality. People are losing their jobs and people are getting less money at the end of the month. So the burden that the family and business have from the crisis, it's a very huge one. So we are expecting there will be more unemployment when in the next year. So there is a lot of people losing their houses, and they are going to be evicted from their houses. So we must have policies that answer to this new wage of inequality and of poverty that will be put in place as a consequence of the COVID crisis. But the COVID crisis also showed us that the inequalities that already existed between classes, between people that live in the center of the city and the people that live in the suburbs, all the difference that existed already in the society were they were amplified by the COVID crisis. So people that are from ethnic minorities, women, people with will have some kind of an ability, people that are that suffer discrimination, of gender discrimination, of sexual orientation discrimination, of sexual identity discrimination. All these people were had a stronger impact of the inequality in their lives. So the municipality and the politicians have the responsibility to answer and to have specific policies to answer to this difference that existed already and were more amplified by COVID. We know that people, Afro-descendant people or foreigner people, migrants that live in Lisbon, are more impacted by the COVID than the other, and they have a lower access to health care, to vaccination, and all these to housing also. All these difference, if we can take this example, all these difference are more how can I say it, in plain sight with the COVID crisis. So we can no longer say that we are addressing social issues and we are making a more strong equality by addressing only to social difference. We have to have a policy that address to all these kind of questions that we and by that we can create a more equal society. But we have also a very strong how can I say it, in the city of Lisbon. We saw that with a reduction of the tourists, the city were some of the business of the city were bankrupted because they didn't have the public that usually have to sustain the business. So the economic activity is centered in tourism or in business related to tourism. So with the decrease on tourism, there's a decrease on the economic activity of the city. So it had also a great impact on the people that live in Lisbon. So we have the COVID crisis that brought many less tourists to the city, and some parts of the city and some business of the city are not able or won't be able to get on their feet again. So there's a huge burden from this monoculture of tourism, of tourists being the main activity on the city. And it has also impact on housing, on public service, on urbanism and the way that cities are designed. So we must think of our cities and we must get some response of how can we diversify the economic activity of the city so that won't be so vulnerable to the crisis, and the people that depends on that activities for their jobs and their salaries and other things should be protected. If we they will be more protected if we have a very more diverse activities in the city. So we have had a lot of new challenges to face, and I think I'll be ending with this.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. That was indeed very, very clear. And now we jump to our last speaker in this first round. So, David, you currently you serve as a general coordinator of the Progressive International. And according to your website, this was founded in May 2020 to unite, organize, and mobilize progressive forces around the world. Like, wow, that's quite a challenge. Well, in this panel and today we're talking about how to build alliances, how to build networks, and I think the first question it will be basically if you can tell us more about this new, let's say, organization that you're coordinating. If you can please tell us more about the Progressive International, who you are, what you do. So David, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for the invitation to speak about our work, and of course to meet Beatrice and Emily and think together about the question of how to build these networks transnationally. I think from the side of the Progressive International, in building this project, we begin from a very similar place as Fearless Cities. And that place is questioning what the word solidarity means. And our analysis basically is that solidarity is a very popular concept, but most of the time when we use it symbolically. So we say, I stand in solidarity with the people of Brazil, or we tweet, I stand in solidarity with the people of India as they confront the neo-authoritarian force of Narendra Modi, for example. But that we might want to redefine or repopulate this concept of solidarity to be more material, to be more substantive, to be less symbolic. And so every single thing we do in the Progressive International towards the construction of this new international is about trying to deliver on that promise of international solidarity. So we do that in three main ways across three main pillars of work. Each of those pillars is designed exactly to deliver, to redefine this concept of international solidarity. So for example, the first pillar of work that we have is our so-called movement pillar. And there we basically begin from the premise that we have incredible activists, community organizers, working at the municipal level, working at the regional level, all around the world, who are confronting similar crises, whether that's a crisis of housing insecurity or of workers' rights. These people are learning similar lessons, but we lack a network that can make the sum of these, or make these community organizers and activists greater than the sum of their individual parts. Fearless Cities is such a tremendously important initiative for this reason, in bringing together these cities to share knowledge, to communicate about what's happening and what we've learned in the process of municipal transformation. But to give you one example of what this work entails, we've got people across the world who are affected by a single corporation, Amazon, and the richest person on the planet, Jeff Bezos. Those are people who work directly for Jeff Bezos as tech workers in Seattle. Those are people who work as Amazon warehouse workers in Poland. But they're also people who work for Amazon suppliers in countries like Cambodia, who work in garment factories in countries like Bangladesh, and even further afield. There are people like hawkers in India who rely on heavily local ecosystems of food production and distribution to make a living. They go to the farms, they buy the food, they come to the cities, they sell the food. And Amazon, through its rapid process of vertical and horizontal integration, has eviscerated many of these local economic ecosystems. So what do we bring to the table as a new international in that context? We are uniting workers, activists, climate justice activists, and people who are concerned about corporate abuse, all the way down that supply chain, with the idea that once those workers are united, they can throw gears in the sand of Amazon's extraction from its workers, extraction from the planets, extraction from our societies, and we can actually, increase the amount of collective power that we have across that full Amazon supply chain. It's not going to be enough in our estimation for the workers in Germany in that warehouse to rise up, because there's so much room in this vicious world of, let's say, hyper liberal integrated globalization for a race to the bottom to just leak out into neighboring Hungary, for example. So that's one way in which we can deliver on the promise of solidarity, by recognizing that each of the struggles across that entire supply chain, people who work for Amazon, who are affected by Amazon and even further afield, must be linked in a common campaign to make Amazon pay, which was one of the big campaigns that we launched this year, which brought together these workers and climate justice activists, as well as a network of 450 parliamentarians from around the world to try to stand up to Jeff Bezos. The next pillar of work that we have is our blueprint pillar. This is about crafting a vision, a shared vision of international transformation. You know, this is going to be a familiar analysis to people who are watching this, but for so long we've seeded the ground of the imagination of what global governance might look like to fora like Davos and others, to really think through, okay, what is the globalization reset going to look like? What's globalization 2.0? What's our vision for these international institutions? And I think, personally, I think that progressive forces often play a game of peekaboo, where they say, well, if we just don't talk about the IMF, it's not really there. This is less true in Southern Europe, where the IMF has played such an important role in the Troika. But there are places like the United States, my home country, where we just don't talk about many of these institutions of global governance. We don't talk about them. We don't develop counter visions. We don't challenge the dominant narrative. And so we have this idea that, you know, if we can bring together progressive forces, scholars, practitioners, to be thinking through what is our own vision of globalization, something that, of course, was popular at the turn of the millennium in the World Social Forum days, but we have since kind of degraded a lot of that infrastructure. That could be quite powerful. So one good example is our Debt Justice Collective, bringing together scholars like Jayati Ghosh, Katerina Pistor, a bunch of people from around the world to think through, at this present moment, the greatest debt crisis in history. What's our alternative vision? How are we going to turn the tables? And that's not just an academic exercise. So that network of debt justice scholars has mobilized to fight austerity in countries like Ecuador, where the IMF has been basically, despite all their chat about transcending austerity and a new fiscal expansion, forcing the layoff of healthcare workers in the context of a global health emergency. That's mobilizing that network of scholars to fight central bank independence, central bank privatization, which still remains a key tenet of structural adjustment at the World Bank and the IMF. So we need to think together about what is our vision. I know that Fearless Cities has a lot of invested a lot in this question of what does municipalist transformation look like in these different parts of the world. So that's the blueprint pillar, really thinking about what's our vision for global transformation. And the third, perhaps most novel, is trying to take communications seriously. So this is our wire pillar, where we're trying to build a wire service for the world's progressive forces. And there we begin also from a simple premise, which is that one of the main things that challenges we face as activists are linguistic barriers. You know, so much is happening in these linguistic silos. We have such a difficult time, despite the technological progress we've made towards Google Translate, simultaneous translation on the web pages we go to, simultaneous tweet translations, of just learning about what's happening in our respective political ecosystems, learning about what's happening in our each other's lives. So we've built this network of translators, and we built a network of publications, over 40 publications in over 30 countries. And that network of publications is transmits content that we translate and then disseminate back through that same network, trying to take seriously the question of what are our media of communication? What kind of stories are we fed? What is our diet of daily political content? And then, trying to feed into there, not just the classic stories of reportage and these individual publications, but stories from the front lines. So when there's a strike kicking off in a mine in Armenia, we have a statement from the miners in Armenia telling us what's happening there. When things are kicking off and Erdogan's neo-fascist regime is marching to slaughter the Kurds, we're hearing directly from this Kurdish community. But of course, in their native language. And then we're translating that and ensuring that people in Mexico, people in Brazil, people in Pakistan are hearing from these different frontline forces. So at its broadest level, we have the ambition to be a new international. That means that we have members, social movements, political parties, trade unions that represent millions of people around the world, from India's National Alliance of People's Movements to Colombia's Congreso de los Pueblos to the United States Sunrise Movement, leading the charge for a Green New Deal in the United States. And we try to bring those members together in these concrete actions and campaigns, bring those members together to think about what, for example, an international green recovery might look like, and bring those members together to share their stories, their statements, their pleas for solidarity from the international community concretely. So we do a lot of work in this field of trying to redefine what solidarity might look like. Recently, we held a summit for vaccine internationalism, where we said, look, we all know that we're confronting a system of vaccine apartheid, where half the world, the rich countries, are hoarding vaccines, are dominating these institutions of world trade and preventing the transmission of technology and vaccine supply to parts of the world where it's not set to arrive for another 57 years. So what are we going to do? Are we going to wait around for the WTO to suddenly change its mind and chuck out the TRIPS agreement? No, we're going to convene states from across the global south, states like Kerala, Kisumu County, Kenya, Bolivia, Argentina, Cuba, Venezuela, Mexico, to create a forum for South-South cooperation towards the production, distribution, and delivery of vaccines for all. It's about making these concrete steps towards that old vision of a new international economic order, or in that case, a new international health order. So this is what we're constantly striving to do, to bring members together, not in a network that just serves as a sort of forum for discussion, although building those bonds of trust, bringing people together is so crucial, but to try to think about the ways in which those members can do things concretely, can deliver on the fundamental core definition of solidarity, which is not the expression of sympathy for people far away. It's the recognition that their struggle is your struggle. And if you don't fight for them now, and if you don't link up, that their problems will become your problems in due course, which is, of course, the lesson of the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the reasons why, again, I think Fearless Cities is such an important initiative in terms of recognizing the shared fate of cities and indeed people beyond them around the world. So for that, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present a bit of the work that we do at the PI. And of course, I invite you all, my fellow panelists and those watching at home to get involved, because we're very excited about the year ahead.
Thank you, David. That indeed sounds like a very interesting project that many of us are excited to take part of. With your speech, we finished the first round. Let me remind the people following us that they can use the Q&A tool to ask questions that will pass to our speakers after this block. I will go back to Emily now to continue our discussion today, and I wanted to ask you a bit about new scenarios and how the municipalities and how these networks we are in these new scenarios. And I wanted you to comment about something very specific. In Spain, we often say that Italy is a big political laboratory, and I wanted to ask you about the latest experiment in this big political laboratory, that it's the Draghi operation. As you know, I'm living in Brussels, and in Brussels, in the so-called Eurobubble that was largely celebrated as a master movement. But now what we see now is that the electoral prospects are really worrying, with two political parties, both La Lega and Fratelli d'Italia, leading the polls. So my question is, did this experiment work? Are there shortcuts to block the far right to access to power? And yeah, what are your views on the real risk of two far right parties leading the Italian government, and how these networks that you were mentioning before, all these networks of city social movements, all these alliances in the south, how we can help to avoid this horrible scenario? So, Emily, floor is yours.
Thanks. So that's a pretty difficult question. I think, to be truly honest, I'm not sure if there is a shortcut I think the far right's access to power at the moment can be perhaps delayed, but I'm not sure if it can be stopped, unfortunately. Definitely the only way to work to stop it is a political progressive alliance. The fact is the Draghi government is purely a return to technocracies in power, like literally. The lesson we didn't learn from the last crisis is being put forth in front of us, in front of our eyes, with many celebrating it, and instead it's it's an operation that simply is responding to big corporations' interests, to big companies. It's not really redistributing wealth. It's not really looking at the 99% to be, to give the short version of what we feel of this government. So this is the concern. The big difference with 10 years ago, of course, is 10 years ago it was all about reducing debt. And now instead, there's going to be quite the budget to invest on the future of our country. So this is, of course, the challenge we face. The problem is the parties that are in this government have very few chances to reverse the far right's upcoming victory if they don't understand that in order to be reliable for voters, they have to radically change their approach as soon as possible. There's not much left in the government that's in office right now. The government is this very weird coalition with the Northern League, but not Fratelli d'Italia. There's the Democratic Party. The small left parties that were existing have broken up, and some are in the government, some are on the opposition. So the situation, to be honest, in Italy, the current situation is very worrisome for us, of course. One problem is we haven't managed to find a convincing national leftist platform. The Democratic Party is, a coalition of very different sort of center-left ideas. In some cities, it leans more towards the left. This is what we're trying to work on in Bologna, for example, which is still a bit of a bubble, I have to say, compared to the rest of the country. But in a lot of cities and in the country in general, it's still perceived as a party that's very close to the system. Whereas these far-right movements, both La Lega and Fratelli d'Italia, have somehow managed to give the population this anti-system feel, while actually they're always protecting corporations and they're always looking to destroy policy that invest on, welfare and access to healthcare and in general, any public sector there in the regions that they govern. Healthcare has been partially privatized, even though we have a universal healthcare system. So, it's very strange, but it's apparent to all of us how now the right seems to be the anti-system and the center-left Democratic Party, let's say, is too close to still a neoliberal view and a view that protects companies and corporations and not the 99%. So what can we do in this very, very tricky scenario? I think what we have to do is try to build this network of municipalist platforms and possibly try to make way of a new idea, a new subject that is putting politics in place at a national level, because we literally don't have a party that represents us perfectly. Like we are, talking with our other city councilors or activists and movements in other cities in Italy, and often sharing ideas and policies like we do in these transnational organizations, but we don't have somebody who can advance our agenda perfectly. So we need to build a bottom-up movement and bring this, even a new generation. I'm not I'm not ageist at all, so I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but I'm saying a new way of politics where we redistribute the power of politics to activists, to movements, a new idea that brings again that real concept of what we think is the left, right? Which is connecting the institution with the 99%. This is the only direction we need to move in. But just to be, I'm usually pretty optimistic, so this is strange for me, but I have to say I am worried, and I think it is a threat that the far right in Italy could gain power for sure, and a neoliberal government like the one we're seeing now that's perfectly technocratic is definitely not the solution. It's only going to make them get in power faster, unfortunately.
Well, that was indeed worrying. It was indeed worrying. But now let's move to Portugal, where we have a slightly more positive scenario, to say the least. And Beatrice, you will be the candidate in the elections in September. And yeah, I wanted to ask you, in your platform, I see that you have a strong focus on environment, on social equality, and housing. You talk a lot about housing. You also did in your first speech. I wanted to ask you, in your views, what are the fights that are common to all the southern cities, and how can we work together to make our voices stronger? And also, in your case, I think it's interesting how we can make that also from the institutions, from the city council in a city like Lisbon. What are your views on that?
Thank you very much, Jesus. Yes, it's a very how can I say, housing it's a very difficult it's not a very difficult question. It's a very difficult problem for the people that want to live in Lisbon, because the prices are very high. It's very hard to find a house that one can pay with the salary that we have. So it's the center of our proposal. It's to get more houses in the market, but houses in a controlled place, with a controlled price that people can pay. So we think that one of the things that created this difficulty is the way that the city is serving big corporation, not big corporation, but it's serving the business. So we say that we want to put people first, people before business, because we have this comparison that because we think that the city is being I'm not remembering the English word, but the city street is being treated like a merchandise. So I think there's the thing that we have in common in southern cities, because the cities are treated like a merchandise that can be sold and can be rented, that can be put it to have more capital. So we see the center of the cities and the buildings are in the speculative market. So we must have policies that go against this idea of the city like a merchandise that is to be sold, that is to be to have an increased value. So we want to put people first, and we have to have policies for the 99, like Emily said. So it's very important that we address this issue, that we fight this idea of a city that is always more expensive, and people don't have a possibility to find a house, to have the right to the place, have a right to the city. They're only allowed to be in the city to work, and then they have to leave, because the city is for the ones that have more money, that can buy the houses or can rent the houses, and they are entitled to live in the city. So we must fight this this agenda, and we must fight this view of the city. So another issue that is, I think, that is common is the climate change. So we especially for cities that are near the sea or near the river, like Lisbon, that is near the sea. So if we don't have policy that address climate change, that improves I'm not remembering the English word for it, but that doesn't deal with public transportation, doesn't deal with a growing number of cars that are in the city, doesn't find ways to reduce the number of cars. We don't respond correctly to the climate change. But I wanted also to say that we need to bring to have a more robust dialogue with the social movement. So because I think that the social transformation in part results from the struggle that the social movement are making on the communities, but also in specific agendas like gender agenda, anti-racism, anti-LGBT phobia, and other agendas. So we must find places for real participation of the social movement in the decision making. So it's not only consulting the representation or representative of the social movement, we must bring them to the policy making. So it's very important to also make campaigns that we can address the same question that are happening in other cities, so we can straight networking, but also learn with the experience of other cities that are addressing, that have policies that we can implement in Lisbon. I think that I answered the question.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Indeed, that was very, very clear. Well, let's finish this round with David. We have been talking a bit about new scenarios. So Emily mentioned one very obvious one, that it's from debt to investment, right? The difference of the political scenario 10 years ago. Beatrice was mentioning also the climate change. Now I wanted to ask you about another obvious change of a scenario, that is the change in the US politics. And here, of course, I will remind this AOC statement that it's Biden has exceeded the progressives' expectations. I told you before, I'm an expert on taxation, and I have to say that the global agenda on taxation, indeed, it has exceeded the expectations coming from the US. I wanted to ask you, with all these changes, how the progressives, how the social movements, how all these alternative forces, how we should interact with these changes? What do you think is favoring us, this global agenda? What can we expect about the coming years?
I want to start with a provocation in response to your question, which is that I don't think there is a global agenda. I think that increasingly we have two completely different agendas. And I think it's helpful for us to look at a recent event to explain why this provocation might make sense. The G7 met recently, as we know, in Cornwall in the UK, and they developed this new consensus, the Cornwall Consensus. And this includes many of the aspects that you described before: a new consensus on fiscal expansion, a new consensus on environmental protections, a new consensus on taxation in order to prevent a race to the bottom of corporates and their increasing concentration. And the premise of that new consensus is that the old consensus is dead, that the Washington Consensus, which dominated the world and the annals of global governance in the 70s, 80s, 90s, well into the 2000s, that's a thing of the past. But it's not. And what we see is an agenda that this kind of zombie globalization, where the Washington Consensus, even while many of the most powerful people at the top of institutions talk about new ideas taking hold in parts of the world, continue to implement these backwards and sort of to demand the implementation of these neoliberal maxims around the world. So I mentioned a couple of them in my overview of the work that we do at the Progressive International, but let's take austerity. There's a new Bidenist consensus that the German Greens would agree on. even Macron would agree on, even Boris Johnson agrees on. We need to spend more money. But what are the terms and conditions of IMF bailout programs in Egypt, Pakistan, Lebanon, Ecuador, Bolivia, all around the world? They are slashing public spending, laying off public sector workers, privatizing infrastructure. The old structural adjustment programs, despite the mountain of literature coming out of the IMF itself, demonstrating its deleterious impact on communities, on citizens, on public services, continues to be the dominant mode of writing these bailout packages. And here again, we come back to Southern Europe. We don't need to look further afield to Latin America, North Africa, South Asia. We can simply talk about the ways in which the structural conditions that trap a country like Greece, where I am now, in a cycle of underinvestment remains written into the basic code of European political economy or of Eurozone political economy. So austerity is a good example. Another good example is our system of international trade. There is a new consensus. No one is denying there's a new consensus that things like investor-state dispute settlement, ISDS, is hugely problematic, neo-colonial. But what's happening with ISDS? Nothing. I'll give a better example. The TRIPS agreement, written in 1994 to protect essentially American pharmaceutical companies who wanted to crank up their prices on drugs like HIV retrovirals, right? This is one of the most vicious, talk about neo-colonial agreements that we've ever written. And we only wrote it 25 years ago. Okay, so this is not like this is a biblical text. We just did this. And yet, in the context of the worst pandemic that any of us have seen in our lifetimes in this century, we haven't succeeded to even write a small amendment to the TRIPS agreement. The same TRIPS agreement that is now seeing thousands and thousands of people dying all around the world of this vicious virus. Those structures of world trade remain completely intact. I could go on and on about the institutions of global governance and the failure of a new consensus to penetrate their actual practices. So my concern is that we're moving towards a kind of Elysium world, where we're going to have better social protections, where we're going to have a new Cornwall consensus. And frankly, it could even prevail on the European continent. I have my doubts, building on Emily's list of doubts. I have my doubts that the recovery plans are going to deliver a new wave of job creation and investment and really the full death of austerity in Europe. But we might move to that world. Let's not rule out that possibility. But what I'm not seeing are the ways in which the rules of development, of trade, of financial regulation are transforming for the vast majority of the global population. And of course, I resent the extent to which, because it remains this hegemon, political change in the United States has a reverberating effect on political change elsewhere. I resent the ways in which, when Biden exceeds expectations, it makes it easier for Ursula von der Leyen to exceed expectations. And that is a world that I don't want to live in, and that makes me feel quite uncomfortable as someone from the United States. But I think that we need to be really attentive to who's setting the agenda, how does that agenda change, and where does it stay the same above all? So I think this is an eternal fight for me as from someone from the United States to try to remind my fellow countrymen that their progressive reforms do not necessarily mean that the rules that they have written for other parts of the world have changed as well. But I think that we do live in a really a moment of intense contradiction and intense hypocrisy, where on the one hand, we're erasing the old rules and writing a new rule book. On the other hand, we're insisting that the old one stay the same and that other countries, especially in the global South, are forced to behave by rules that we no longer accept as legitimate.
Well, thank you for this provocation, and thank you also to sometimes remind that we are so privileged to be in this European continent and we live in a bubble, and there are many other things going on all around the world. Now it was the time to go to the Q&A. Fortunately, we don't have any, which obviously means that you were very clear in your speeches and everyone agreed with you, no doubt. But we still have a few minutes, so let me move on with a few questions, and maybe we'll reverse the order, and we'll start this time again with David. You mentioned a couple of times that one of the targets of Progressive International, it was also to avoid these taboos that sometimes we have the Progressive to talk about the IMF and so on. And I think something very relevant that precisely with the debates on the civil society about the TTIP, it was what to do with the WTO, because this is a space that historically we've been fighting against, right? Do you see any potential? Do you see any margin of transformation? Is it possible a progressive agenda to have a fair WTO? And alternatively, do we have any other way to have an institution to rule in commercial globalization?
I basically think that what we have at the global level is a failure of imagination. So we have progressive forces that are galloping forward in cities, especially to reimagine what cities might look like. We have powerful new national political forces who are rethinking, the foundations of our social contract at the national level. In my case, oftentimes thinking about writing new constitutions. In Chile, they're writing a new constitution. We have lots of exciting new thinking about democratic ownership, about how we can restructure our economies, but much of that new imaginative effort hasn't yet reached the international level. So we should feel much more empowered to think about the new kinds of institutions we want to build, because it's going to be us that are building them. I'll take a good example. One of the arms of the World Bank is called the International Finance Corporation, the IFC. And it's just a vicious vehicle of privatization, exploitation, extraction. All they basically do is go into parts of the world, identify asset classes for investors to come, vulturize the economy, privatize parts of the infrastructure, and end up kind of creating this extractive dynamic, mostly from the north to the south. Why can't we create a community wealth building corporation at the international level that takes resources, that learns the lessons of the Barcelona model, the Preston model, the Cleveland model, that learns the lessons of municipal. This is a question for fearless cities, right? Why can't we build a new international fund that of course will replenish itself, but that these cities are putting towards a common fund that helps to build those institutions of community wealth building, that helps to construct exactly the kinds of local economies that are regenerative, and that then feeds back into that same fund. So there is a kind of hesitation, maybe because it feels not feasible, maybe because it feels like it's another group of people who actually do the work of institution building at the international level, even though we feel empowered to do it at local, regional, and national levels. But I think that the first step is less to say, can we live without a WTO, or to pull our hair out. It's about what is to be done about the IMF. It's to give ourselves a bit more confidence and breathing room to say, someone made this world of global governance, so we can remake it. We can make whatever we want to do. There's no rules that prevent us from thinking about the kinds of institutions that we need, even with the highly uneven and unfavorable distribution of power that we face as progressive forces in a world dominated by conservative power. So I just feel like, this is why, another reason why this forum is so exciting, because we can just, we have the opportunity to engage in this active imagination and start to feel a bit more courageous about how we advance that critique. But first we have to agree that it's worthwhile to talk about these global issues with the force that it deserves, in the same way that we talk about municipal and regional and national issues.
Indeed, and this is one of the things we're trying to do in the debates in the Fearless. Well, we don't have any Q&A yet, so I have another question for Emily in this case. I wanted to ask you, we are about these new scenarios and these new situations. I have the feeling that we are facing also a backlash in gender rights and LGBTI rights. I know this is something that it's very close to your heart in Coalizione Civica. I wanted to ask you, how are you dealing with that? What kind of initiatives, what kind of collective action can be done to fight against all this gender backlash and all this LGBT phobia that we are witnessing? It's very obvious in some cases, like in Poland, in Hungary, where it's institutionalized, but also in many other countries where we consider ourselves very progressive in this regard. We've seen, probably you saw the case in Spain recently, where Samuel was smarter because he was loving in a different way. So I wanted to ask you about that. How can you do it at the local level, and how can work collective against this?
Thank you, Jesus, for this question, because it gives me the chance to go back to my usual optimistic self compared to the previous one. I'm very positive on this, actually, because even though Italy, as well as Spain and probably Portugal in part as well, is a very patriarchal country for sure. And right now we're dealing with this crazy debate because there's a law that's being discussed in our parliament which simply protects the LGBT community from hate crimes and violence. It changes some of the criminal code laws on that. And the fight on this law, like the debate is crazy, like with the far right wing movements that are just spreading fake news about it, saying that, you know, the left wants to teach children to be gay from when they're, you know, 3 in nurseries, like all this sort of dispute. And also the Vatican decided to comment on the law, saying that they felt that it wasn't a perfect law and should be changed. So we even had, you know, another country which is inside our country geographically, but is another state, and it's a religious state intervening in our political debate. And so you say, so why are you positive about this? I'm positive about this because the reaction to this patriarchal system, and a system that is very set on cisgender, you know, white male straight men, is being tackled from movements in a very intersectional manner all across the country. Just last week we had our Pride in Bologna, but in the same week there was a trans feminist march, a migrant sort of flash mob asking for answers on their permits to live and work in Italy, and the LGBT Pride. And they were all sort of co-organized by different associations in the LGBT movement, in the migrants' rights international movement, in the feminist movement. Everybody went to the other's sort of flash mob or initiative. And the Pride this year that, you know, the law is being discussed in our parliament in this way, in such a vicious manner in the public debate, was the biggest ever. We had 30,000 people marching through the streets of Bologna. I know this might be a number that in other cities doesn't seem grand, but in Bologna, it's definitely a huge crowd. And I'm also seeing a very different perspective in new generations. This is just, you know, a personal point of view, but I've noticed, compared to the awareness that I had as an ally or members of the LGBT community had when we were, you know, in school, new generations now, we've gone to talk with them, you know, maybe to raise awareness about issues. They're very well aware, they're very woke, and they're so more aware than we are, and so more active in LGBT and anti-patriarchal views and actions, and also environmentalist actions than we were. Like, I'm very positive about these new generations of activists who are just, you know, dominating the streets, and they're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Like, they, you know, there's no question about it. It's almost weird for them that there are still people in our country who are transphobic, or who are you know, anti-feminist, or who are questioning right to abortion. So as much as the situation is still difficult, and we are still in a, you know, very patriarchal system, I feel the response from the movements and the organizations working together and bringing this new view of intersectional politics is very you know, heartwarming. And I'm positive about this. Even though we're in a hard situation, I see a good outcome for our country in this direction.
Well, that's great to hear a little bit of optimism on that. And Beatrice, you mentioned a couple of times the issue of housing. I can see that it will be a central part of your campaign. I wanted to ask you about the let's say the shared dimension of that, the European dimension. What are the challenges that you have for your housing proposals coming from the EU? What kind of reactions? Because Emily mentioned before this joint initiative, to bring Airbnb under control, that it's done by many European cities. So what kind of initiatives do you believe that are relevant to do from all the progressive cities, and what kind of challenges, what kind of risks you see coming from the EU?
Thank you, Jesus. The housing is a big issue in Lisbon, in Portugal in general, because we have a very low percentage of municipal houses. All of them are in the free market. So we must get a bigger number of houses with lower prices, because, as I say already in the other intervention that I made, there's a big dispute in the housing market. So part of the house were allocated in the Airbnb system, and it's very huge in the center of the city, and this had an effect of contagious effect on the housing prices. So the prices were getting higher and higher because there were less houses available. On the other hand, we had this reconstruction of the buildings. So the buildings are getting more expensive, getting more luxurious in the center of the city. So the center of the city, it's a very high, a place that the prices are very high. So people they are not able to live in the center because they don't have enough money. Most of the families don't have enough money to pay the prices there are of the houses in the center. So they have to live in the suburbs of the city. So many people come to the city to work because it's the place where the work exists, and then they get out on the end of the day to the suburbs where they live. So we must on one hand have more houses with lower prices that people can effectively live in Lisbon, so and can effectively live in the cities, and they don't have to live in the suburbs. We must have more jobs in the suburbs, more public service, more equipment in the suburbs, that people can make their lives on the place, near the place they live. So we must get in place this idea of a city of proximity, a city that you can go with a bus, by bus, or with your by foot, or using another soft method. You can go to the school, to the public center. You can go to a library, or can go to supermarkets. But you can do all these things because they are near the place that you live. So we must transform our cities to this model of cities that are more comfortable ones, that you don't have to make 2 hours in a bus to go to work. So we must, on one hand, have more houses in the center for the people that want to live in the center, can have this opportunity to live in the center. And we must transform this idea of the city, that we have more bikes that are in the city, that we have less cars, that we have more proximity, that we have more different economical activities. So we are in the place that we can no longer sustain the cities that we have. We must transform our cities. We must think other ways of having cities. So we can have these articulations with other cities that are more advanced in this process of getting more proximity in their public environment. So we can learn with these examples. We can learn with this experience. But I also want to say that I'm very excited with the experience that are happening in the global south. Then we can learn a lot about this housing experience, with this community experience of getting how to create more sustained cities, more sustained societies. So this is very important for us to learn with these social movements that are happening in Brazil, that are happening in Chile and other places. And also we must have policies that can address specific questions that different people have. We have gender issues that we must put in place in the city that we are constructing. We have anti-racism policies that are in need in the cities that we are constructing. We have to have anti-LGBT phobia policies that are in need. We have a lot of things that we must transform, and we have, it's needed imagination to be able to imagine others different forms of doing the things that we need. We cannot reply all recipes, because if we use all recipes, we are going to have the same problems that we are dealing now. So we must transform the way that we do things to get to this new solidarity societies with more common environment and more comfortable environment for all the people that live in the cities. And large cities are more has these diverse issues that they have to deal with.
Well, thank you very much for this very clear answer. Now I just wanted to ask you if any of you, Beatrice, David, Emily, if you want to react to any of the things that your colleagues have said today, if you want to add any comment, if you have any idea that was missing. So just the floor is yours. So whoever wants to comment, please. Otherwise, we just can wrap up a bit and we close the session, Beatrice. So please.
Yes, I wanted to comment what David and Emily says about the importance of the social movement and the way that social movement can lead us to another dimension of organizing our societies, organizing our demands, and how can we translate the demands of the social movement to policy making. So we must, as a policy maker, we must have this constant dialogue with the representation of the social movement, but we also need to be able to talk to each other so that we can learn about the experience that other cities are making. So we can learn about the experience of Barcelona dealing with Airbnb and the tourist pressure on the cities. We can learn with the cities of the Northern Europe how to respond to climate change, how to create more sustainable cities, how to reduce the number of cars that are entering our cities, how to transform the public space that children can be playing in the public space. There are less cars, there are zones that cars that are not allowed. We must get in touch with these realities in the way that the cities are built. How can we address inequality? How can we address racism? How can we address gender discrimination? How can we answer to all these things that we are dealing in the cities, that we can create more equal cities, cities that have more justice, that people find themselves participating in the cities. I think this debate was very interesting because we had all these contribution that give us tools to think how can we transform our cities, how can we work and policy and make policies for the 99. It's very important.
David and Emily, do you want to add something else? Emily.
I'd add something just very quickly. Beatrice, we share so many of the same issues, you know, from the right to housing and anti-discrimination policies to building this sort of 15-minute city where you can reach everything you need, and tackling that sort of, even, you know, the urban view of the city that so often is conceived on, you know, one singular point of view, you know, the white male straight man. So tackling that, it's very refreshing just to hear that we're facing the same issues. And David, I already want to, you know, join Progressive International, but I was thinking of how we can keep all this together. And you know, it might be not generous of me to say this at Fearless Cities, because you guys in Barcelona are doing the best job possible in uniting us and already giving us a chance to meet. But my question is, how can we make this sort of permanent? Because, you know, every time I participate in these sort of events, I take home a lot of grand ideas, and, you know, we discuss them within our organizations, and we think, okay, you know, we've got to be in touch with this particular organization because they're facing the same sort of issue we are. And then, you know, we go back to our day-to-day administration routine, and sometimes we forget and we feel alone again. So I'm thinking maybe we need to sort of build a school of permanent political action and municipal movement, just to keep building this network and keep sort of, you know, the ecologist movement has taught this so well, keep thinking globally and acting locally, right? That has to be the direction we maintain. So perhaps together, you know, Fearless Cities and Barcelona en Comú's International Committee, you guys are the best at this. We could figure out a way to, you know, take all those materials that David organization has been working at and has translated them, and teach them, you know, and have meetings that are more frequent to even inspire people. Like, our greatest problem in Italy is, again, as we were saying before, we don't have a national platform that really represents what we're fighting for. We don't have, we have to build it from zero. So, and a lot of the times right now, the population is even looking towards the far right because it's anti-system, and it's giving them some sort of hope that they're going to tackle the system. And instead, the left, the real left, sometimes people don't feel so hopeful towards it because we haven't managed to get into government, right? The only left that the people know is the Democratic Party, which again still has a lot of neoliberal views. So somehow we have to change this around and bring hope back to the people and show them that we have radical ideas, but they also have a concrete possibility of being of making change. You know, as you were saying before, David, like, we don't have to limit ourselves. Possibilities are endless, and capitalists have shown us that. And so why can't we turn that around and give ourselves that same chance? I feel very strongly about this. So hopefully we could help each other out in this.
Yeah.
Thanks again for the opportunity, all you guys.
I was just going to add to this, just that sharing this desire, this passion for the construction of a more permanent, you know, we always, in the PI, we often use this word infrastructure. What we need is infrastructure. You know, in Fearless Cities, if I could make a petition to Fearless Cities to think about how we can turn these beautiful moments of encounter into more permanent infrastructure, which is, you know, gets us half the way towards the kinds of imaginative institution building I was describing before, about if we can institutionalize this, if we can make it more permanent, then two things happen. First, it becomes a way for us to coordinate action, to learn from each other, to do the work that we're doing in short form between the 5th and the 10th of July of this year. And also, we become a kind of standing threat to our opponents, that we exist in a we're already divided and therefore conquered in this way. And if we can kind of build those institutions to say that, there's any attempt by those forces of the far right is going to encounter a coordinated network on the other side. I think that could have its own positive, virtuous cycle of construction, institutionalization, reformation. And I think that that's just an incredibly exciting project that has so much more work to do. So on that, I'm really excited to work with all of you towards the construction of this new internationalist infrastructure.
All right, I think that was a very good ending of one of the topics that we've had during the panel, right? How to make this space more permanent and how to develop an infrastructure. David just said. Just to wrap up, 3 ideas. I think it was very interesting to hear, especially from Beatrice, what the fearless cities can do and how to face common challenges such as like climate change, housing, very obvious, tourism, the social crisis that sometimes we forget. I think that it was a very accurate picture, the one that Emily shared on how activists can take over power in institutions and the tools we need and how to interact with institutional power. And thank you very much, David, for enlarging the concept of South that originally we expected more the Southern Europe, and you gave this global South perspective that I think it was very, very relevant, and also, gave us more homework on the institutional, fight that we need to deliver also for the global institutions, right? So it has been a pleasure to have this session with you all. It's going to be recorded, so please share it with your contacts. I believe that it has been very, very interesting, and it would be great if all this debate can reach as many people as possible. So thanks a lot for your time. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Jesus.
Thank you.
Thank
you, everyone.
you very much.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good.
Bye.
Bye.